monitoring the chat, and we'll try to get answers to you either during or at the end of the presentation, or certainly we can address them in 2 weeks from now. So with that being said, I think we're ready to go. It's after 2 o'clock, and Ray, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, Rich, thank you very much. And as Rich said, welcome everybody to the Innovative Development Education Academy, Class 2, the tools that you'll need and use. My name is Ray Davis. I'm a principal consultant here for Records and Information Management for Innovative Development. I'm the IDEA class host, and I'm also the chief storyteller. You've heard his voice, and this is who he is. His name is Rich Slaughter. He's the marketing manager here at Innovative Development. He's the IDEA co-host. And yes, while he may not admit it in a public environment, but yet maybe he would, he tolerates Ray as best he can. Rich, how we doing, man?
Doing well, thank you.
Awesome.
Looking forward to the presentation.
Excellent. Let's just show everybody what this whole semester is about in the class schedule. We already did class 1 on September 23rd, where the rubber meets the road. That's already completed. Today we're doing the tools you'll need and use. And then you see on the schedule on 10/21, 11/4, and 11/18 are the last 3 or the following of 3 classes to the semester. It's not just about storing your records. Can you get them back? That's always an interesting question, because a lot of people think it's about, well, we stored it, we're done. No, you're not. It's always important to know the resources that you're dealing with your records management program, both human and financial. And finally, the last class will be about the future of records management. As Rich said, but I will reiterate here, if you have a question during class, that's great. Please keep your microphones muted at all times. Just enter your question into the chat box, and then Rich will monitor that as we go along. If he thinks the question is too in-depth for the amount of time that we have left in the class, we can always answer at the beginning of next class. But if the question you're asking, I can give you a quick reply, we can definitely answer that question now. Just to give you an example, following up, give you an update from class 1. And actually, it's a more complete answer to the question that was when it was posed to us. We told you at the end of this semester, after the 5 classes, you'll receive a survey, and then you can download the certificate of completion for your records. So if you're filing continuing education credits with either AIM or the ICRM or ARMA, they have all agreed that the 5 classes of our semester are worth 5 continuing education credits. So AIM and ARMA calls them CEUs and ICRM calls them CMPs. But the question was, is the certificate a record? And my initial answer in the last class was, the certificate of completion is a record for you, the attendees. It's not a record for us here at IDEA. But after the class was over, doing what I normally do, I kind of thought about it for a while. And I don't change that part of my answer, but I'll add this. For us at IDEA and Innovative Development, all of the correspondence that went on between us and AIM, the ICRM, and ARMA, asking would they issue continuing education credits, and their responses that they would, for Innovative, those are records for us. If you ever went and tried to apply your continuing education credits to any 3 of these organizations, and just by sheer coincidence, one of them said, we have no idea what you're talking about, we have the records on our side to prove that they did and that they did authorize it. So that's just a more complete answer. But again, attend all the 5 classes with us at the end, download your certificate, put your name and date on it, and keep it as your record to say, I've attended these classes, and here's what I'm going to use for my 5 continuing education credits. Class 2 in this fall 2024 semester is the tools that you'll need and use. And we'll talk about a number of things today that we're going to call tools. Everybody wears that imaginary.
I don't know. Oh.
Everybody, has that imaginary tool belt that's around their waist, and we all have the opportunity to put different tools in them. And we'll talk about a bunch of those today. Now, before we get started, I'm going to ask Rich a question. Rich, have you ever watched on television, I think it's the History Channel has it, it's called The Show Alone. Have you ever watched that show, Rich?
I have not, only familiar with Survivor.
Okay, all right. Well, it's similar in a way, but there are some differences. But, as what I usually try to do, I try to use other examples and turn them into records management lessons, and we'll do that here. For any of you that haven't seen the show Alone, it is a show that is based on survival skills. And each season, and I think they're up to 12 or 14 seasons now, they pick 10 survivalists that, it is their thing. They go out into remote locations. They know how to camp. They know how to build shelters, build a fire, forage for food, whatever they need to do to survive in the woods by themselves. They will pick a remote area. I know several seasons have been in Canada. There's been a season in Mongolia. They've been all around the world. The whole premise is that they pick 10 different sites within a geographical area far enough apart that the participants cannot find one another, and they're not supposed to. But there's enough space between where they're at that they can look around, figure out where they're going to build the shelter, how they're going to get the food, etc. And then the premise of the show is that the last person that's in the woods, who is alone in the woods by themselves, because the other 9 people have given up, wins $500,000. Every participant in the show has a satellite phone. And if at any point in time they decide they're done, they don't want it anymore, they give up, they just push the button on the satellite phone. They answer at base camp and they say, I'm tapping out. And that is the key phrase they have to use. I'm tapping out. And that means they're done from the show and they have no shot at the prize of $500,000. What the analogy for me with the show Alone, and it is a pretty interesting show. I'm not a survivalist. I'm not a camper. I mean, quite honestly, between you and me and everybody listening to this presentation, for me, camping is the cable TV doesn't work. That's camping to me. None of this pitch a tent, stay in the woods. That's not me. But one of the analogies that there's 2 actually that work best with this show. And the first one is each of the campers is given a list of 40 things. And from that list of 40, they can pick 10. And they get to bring those into the remote location with them, into the woods. So as an example, they may bring a 2-quart pot with a lid, and they'll use that to collect rainwater or collect water and then boil it to make sure that it's safe to drink. And then after that, they may cook in that pot with whatever they catch. Whether it be fish or wildlife or whatever it may be. There's a different saws that they can bring with them because they get dropped off in the woods in the beginning of fall. They need to build a shelter, and then pretty soon it's going to get really cold. So they need to, get firewood so that they can have a fire. Or they may have a tool called a ferro rod, which allows you to create sparks that can help you start a fire versus rubbing 2 sticks together or using the rope wrapped around a stick and starting a fire that way. Now, for the people on Alone, they need to select the tools that complement their strengths. So, they're usually in an area where there's water so you can fish. So fish hooks and fishing line is a part of the tools you can bring with you. But if you're not good at fishing, you wouldn't select that. Maybe you're good at hunting, so a bow with a number of arrows is what you're going to select. But you take the tools from the list that best complement your strengths so that you can stay out there as long as humanly possible and be the last one out there, and you win $500,000. For us in records management, there are so many tools available to us right now, whether it's software, it's hardware, and we'll talk about a bunch of these tools, and you may not even consider them tools, and hopefully after today you will. But you want to make sure that the tools you select, maybe compensate for some of the weaknesses that you have. So that's a little bit different than what they would do on Alone. But also the second thing is, and the question is on the screen, how's your mental toughness? And that may sound like a weird question to you, but how we accomplish things and how we go about it and how we stay motivated all deals with our level of mental toughness. Now, like those people that are in the woods, they're given two cameras at least, and they carry 1 camera around with them when they're walking around, and they document all their activity. They have 1 camera trained on their tent or whatever enclosure they build, and from that, they'll have all that cut and spliced together, and the show is made at the end of the season. But with that, it's just them and the camera out in the woods, and they're alone. Now, I'm about to say something. I think that some of you will be able to to definitely say, I get your point you're making, and it's a shame if you do, but we as records managers can be in a room full of people and we're there alone because a lot of people don't believe what we believe. A lot of people don't understand the value of records management and what our purpose is there. So they may not support our goals and initiatives. So in essence, we could be in that room totally with a bunch of people and be totally by ourselves. And at that point in time, it's your mental toughness that's going to get you through. You have to believe in you. You have to believe in your staff. If you've got staff, you have to believe that what you're doing is right. And if you start to doubt yourself, then your mental toughness is not going to allow you to accomplish what you need to accomplish. So let's learn from the show alone. Let's pick the best tools that we can to make sure that we have a successful records management program. And let's always work to make sure that our mental toughness is at the highest state. And I'll also tell you, and I'll give you the last example from the show. There was one gentleman 7 shows in, and I thought he was going to win. He was eating the right foods. He had the right shelter. Everything was going right. And then all of a sudden, he mentioned his family. And he thought about his wife and he thought about his kids. And all of a sudden, he lost all of his mental toughness and he tapped out and he went home because he missed his family. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just meant he didn't win $500,000. But that split second of thinking about his family was enough to bring down his mental toughness. That's not going to happen in records management. At least I hope it doesn't. I don't think about my family when it comes to records management. They know I do what I do, and they're fine for me. But again, you have to be as mentally tough as you can to make it through. All right, today's agenda. These are the tools we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about regulations and legislation. We're going to talk about policies and procedures. We're going to talk about a records inventory, a records retention schedule, a records index. We're going to talk about the value of technology. And I'm not taking anything out of sequence here. I will tell you, as a 30-plus year records manager who, when I got into it, was well entrenched in physical records and paper and everything else, I value technology like you cannot believe. It is one of the best tools that we've got in records management right now. Audit and compliance is another thing we're going to talk about, and we're going to finish up by talking about keeping all these tools current. So as I said last week, let's get started now with class 2 and enjoy the journey. I've been in records management for over 30 years. I don't think about the destination. The destination is way down the road. The destination is when I retire. So I am enjoying every step of the way within my time within records management, my profession, and my career. And I'm definitely enjoying the fact that you're taking today with me. So again, thank you for being here with us. Legislation versus regulation. There is a difference. And I want you to think about this in terms of building a building. The legislation is the blueprint for the building. It outlines the structure and the purpose and the general guidelines, but it's very high level. It's very 50,000-foot overview, where the regulations are the specific instructions for how you're going to construct that building, the materials you're going to use, the measurements that you have to make sure all the pieces fit together, and the safety standards that you have to comply with when you're building the building. And we all know that, regulations can change over time. I mentioned in last class that I have a vacation house in the Pocono Mountains of Pennsylvania. That house was built by my uncle in 1960, probably in the early 2000s. Well, my parents bought it from my aunt and uncle in the mid 70s, and in the mid 2000s, we had to replace some of the floor joists because there was sagging and there was give in the floor when we walked across it. When we had the contractor come in and replace the floorboards, what he told us was, or replace the joists, what he told us was he was putting in joists that were of bigger dimensions. That in 1960, when my uncle built the house, he built everything to code. He followed all the regulations that were out there. But now in 2000, and obviously now in 2024, those regulations are a little different. So maybe the boards have to be a little bit thicker, be a little bit longer, be a little bit shorter, whatever it may be. But things can change over time. When it comes to legislation, it's created by legislative bodies. It's very broad and it's general, but you're establishing a framework for laws and policies. It's going to involve a process of drafting and debating and voting on bills. And you'll have statutes and acts and codes that you review. The regulations themselves, they're developed by administrative agencies. They're more specific and detailed than legislation, and it involves a rulemaking process that can include public comment and hearings. I don't know how many times that I've seen published, not only in the US federal government, but even in my local government here where I live in Southern New Jersey. They'll want to enact some type of regulation, and they'll give us 30, 60, or 90 days to visit the website, review the regulations that are going to be adopted, and give our comment for it. So I understand that part clearly. And then from that comes rules and orders and decrees. So that is the difference between legislation and regulation, but they guide us in everything that we're trying to do. And even though they're done by somebody else, we didn't create them. Consider them a tool in your tool belt, because when you need to tell your organization why you need to do something, here's a legal reason why. Now, a couple quick examples. If you look at the US federal government, here's just a few pieces of legislation that were enacted. The Federal Records Act of 1950, the Freedom of Information Act, which we call FOIA, or the Privacy Act of 1974. Now, the reason why I didn't put a date on FOIA, there was an original date where FOIA was issued, but then there was also some amendments to FOIA. There's been several things that have been added to it. So if you're really curious about the Freedom of Information Act and understanding FOIA, just do your search on the Freedom of Information Act or FOIA, and look for all of those things that pertain to it. Now, in the U.S. federal government, we have regulations like the General Record Schedules. NARA creates some of the record schedules that are used by the federal agencies. Some of the schedules are created by the agencies themselves, and they're approved by NARA. But for the ones that are created by NARA, these are regulations that the government agencies have to follow. There's been an initiative over the last few years, M1921 and M2307. M stands for memorandum. And these were memorandums that were issued, which was basically giving a time frame for the federal agencies to finish up sending physical records to NARA. And after a particular date, everything had to be electronic. There would be opportunities for exemptions that you could apply for, but they were trying to go as far forward as they could to make sure that only electronic records were being sent to NARA after a particular date. What also happened was, because of COVID and some other things going on, when M1921 came to an end in December 31st of 2022, it was obvious that because of COVID and some other things, it was very difficult to comply with it. And that's why they came out with an 18-month extension, which was built into M2307. And that ended June 30th of 2024. From a commercial business standpoint, we've got legislation such as the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, or the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, also known as HIPAA, or Gramm-Leach-Bliley. Again, there are a number of other pieces of legislation out there. But there's also specific regulations for industries like FINRA, the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority rules, Security and Exchange Commission rules, and Environmental Protection Agency regulations. So these are just some examples of what's different between a government agency and, say, a commercial business. I also wanted to show you there is a difference between policies and procedures, just like there's a difference between legislation and regulation. So when it comes to policies, they're more about the what and the why. What is the policy about? What is the topic that we're going to discuss? And why are we discussing it? Why is it important that we're creating this policy? And all the details about it will go in this document. And then you have the procedures. And those procedures more amount to the how, the who, and the when. How are we going to accomplish it? Who is going to accomplish it? And potentially, when is it going to be accomplished? This may be something that you're expected to start in as soon as possible. It could be something like M1921 and M2307, where there were deadlines. And there has to be review that if something happens, like COVID happened, you may need to extend that deadline. But that also qualifies for the when. So those are the differences between the policies and procedures. There are components of a policy and there are components of procedures, and some of them are similar, but some of them are different. So when we look at policies, you start out with a policy title and then a statement. And then you have definitions, because you may be creating something that's totally brand new that maybe hasn't been heard by a lot of people. So you have to include definitions so people clearly understand what you're talking about. From there, there'll be policy content. There'll be responsibility where things are decided who will do what, how will there be compliance and enforcement, any references that support the policy, and then a revision history. Obviously, if it's the first time that a policy is created, then this is version 1 and you have your date. Somewhere down the road, you're going to review and potentially update this policy if need be. And if you do review it and you update it, there'll be something new in the revision history. When it comes to the components of a procedure, starts out with a title as well, but then gets into some different things like what is the purpose of the procedure? What is its scope? Are there any prerequisites? What steps do you have to take? While this procedure is going on, does it allow for any decision making? What are the expected outcomes? Documentation you've collected along the way, and yes, you finish with revision history, where again, if this is the first time you've created the procedure, if this is the first history you've got, but down the road, if you update it, there'll be another date in the revision history column. What policies and procedures should we have when it comes to records and information management? These are just some. They're not listed in importance. They're listed in alphabetical order. When I think of policies and procedures, I think of that analogy where it's like it fits like a hand in a glove, or in this case, it fits like the pieces of a puzzle coming together. If you want your program to run successfully, you have to clearly define how that's going to happen. If you don't define it, if you don't tell people what needs to be done and how it should be done, then they will do what they think needs to be done. And sometimes they'll be right, and sometimes they may be wrong. I can definitely tell you that if you're following the records management lifecycle, you need to have policies and procedures on disposition. You need to follow it so that you're in accordance to the records management lifecycle. I was in banking. We were constantly in litigation, and it could be as something as easy as somebody tripped going into one of our locations, and now we were getting sued. So I had to pull records on when that sidewalk was created and was it assembled with the proper dimensions, or was it too high or too low, whatever it may be. But we definitely had to have a litigation hold procedure so that, who was issuing the litigation hold, who was it going to, how do we confirm that the holds were placed, all the way up to the very end when litigation is over, and we release the holds and the records to return back to their normal state. You need to have policies and procedures on a records inventory and a retention schedule, and even to things about what are the acceptable locations for storage. And that includes both physical records as well as electronic records. Now you'll have all these policies and procedures. So you take the guesswork out of what needs to be done or should be done, and people are actually following documented policies and procedures and making it happen. Another tool that we start with, and it's an invaluable tool when you're understanding what records make up your program, is the records inventory. A records inventory is basically a list of all of the records that you can determine, records as well as non-records now, that your end users are creating and using and storing. If you're going to do a records inventory, you're going to probably make some phone calls, maybe set up some virtual calls, whether through Teams or Zoom or whatever your platform is. You're going to have conversations with end users enterprise-wide. Okay, we're talking about your area of the organization today. Talk to me about how you do what you do. And you'll call them documents to start with because you can't determine yet whether they're records. Talk to me about the documents that you're using. What documents are you using in paper? What documents are you using electronically? How do you use them? Are you the one that's creating these documents and you're using them, and then that's where they stop? Or do you send them on to somebody else to use? Or did somebody else create the documents you're using, they get passed to you, and now you add your portion of it? And again, we come up with the same next question. Does it stop with you, or do you forward that document on to somebody else? You'll get samples of the paper and electronic records. You're going to chart that record flow all throughout the organization, from where it's first created to where it finally stops and is being retained. And that's your records inventory. If you're going to do it for the first time, whether you start working for an organization, they've never had a records inventory before, you're doing a first one, it's going to be a long and tedious process, but it needs to be done because you need to identify anything that could possibly be a record and determine if it is or not. Now, if you've already done your records inventory and now within your toolkit, you have to update that records inventory every couple of years, every 2 or 3 years. An existing inventory is a little bit easier to update because at least you've got a starting point. You're not starting from scratch, but it starts with a records inventory. A records inventory has a number of components. You're going to be developing record types from it. You're going to determine what formats it's being kept in, physical paper or any other physical media or electronic. Where or both, because some organizations are keeping it in both physical and electronic formats. What locations are you keeping the records in? Are they being kept within a business location, a department? Are they within a records on-site storage room? Is it out with a third-party vendor? Are they in shared drives? Are they in SharePoint? Are they in records management software, line of business systems, or please don't tell me that you do this because some people do. Please don't retain your email or your records and emails. Please get them out of email if you do. Make that one of the first things you want to update within your program is say you cannot store records in email. But you're going to chart all the locations that the records are kept in. What range are we talking about? What date range? How far back do they go? What volume? Volume is very integral in understanding the capacity of your program. If you have a record that you're creating 1,000 of a year, that's one thing versus are you creating 100,000 a year? As an example, within the bank, we had teller transaction data, which was a nightmare to keep when all of the systems were documenting it through physical paper. And we would have boxes and boxes and boxes of teller, they called them teller journal tapes. But basically they were the customer transactions that came through the door. A number of years later, when we converted to electronic systems where the data capture happened right as the teller scanned in the information, we no longer needed those teller journal tapes. All of the records were kept electronically. So the high volume of teller transactions in paper format was a nightmare, much less of a nightmare when it was dealing with an electronic format. And then an extremely important component in your inventory is knowing whether the person you're talking to is a user, where the record or potential record is just coming to them and they're working with it, and either they're storing it or then moving it on. But who's the owner? Who is the one that is going to speak for the validity of that record? How it's set up, the content within it, what information is being collected within that record? Who's that person you can go to and say, is this record correct? It's very important that you're able to do that. And from the records inventory, you'll then move on to the retention schedule. And that's where you take some of the information from the inventory, and now you start to create a list that you can share with the end users to tell them how long they have to keep your records. Now, as we talked about last week, or 2 weeks ago, when I first got into records management, we just saved records. That was it. If you legally had to keep it and it was a record, we kept it. But then down the road, we realized that there were non-records, or what we called information, that didn't have a legal life. But we knew that we had to put some type of life cycle to that as well. So we then expanded it to records and information management. And within our retention schedules, we would document whether it was a record or a non-record. And then we would work for the non-records with the end users to develop a retention life. There was nothing right or wrong because there was no legal retention to it. So basically the retention we worked with and created was legitimate for the non-records. But when it comes to the actual things that are records, there will be a legal citation that you'll look for to determine exactly how long you have to keep that record. But you'll develop a record code. Whether, you can do it, it could be all a numeric code. It could be an alpha code. It could be alphanumeric. It's whatever works for you, whatever makes sense to you and your organization. So if you have accounting records and you started with AC and then you go with numbers, or if it's human resources and you go with HR and you numbers, again, whatever works with you. You're also going to create a record title. What is the correct title for this record or non-record that we're going to retain so that it makes sense to everybody in the organization? You're also going to create a record description, and that description can be very lengthy as you want. You really want to give detail to what this record is about and why it's being kept. And within that description, you're going to talk about whether it is a single record within that record type, or whether it's what we call a big bucket, which are multiple records within the same record type. There are times where they may be kept because it's within a similar working area of the organization that has similar retention, or it could be as easy as, for example, when I was in banking, if you took a loan out, whether it be a residential mortgage or a commercial business loan, whatever the loan may be, there could be 30 different types of records within that loan file. And depending on the loan, maybe you only had to have 10 of those 30, or another type of loan, you'd have to supply 30 of those 30. But it's easier to make a loan file, document which record types are within that big bucket, and then use one record code to store them all because the retention life is the same. We're also going to develop within that retention schedule retention instructions, or what we call triggers. We'll talk more about this in future classes, but there are two triggers that trigger retention and move it down the path for life cycle management. And that is event-based triggers or time-based triggers. Event-based triggers means retention doesn't start until something happens. So it's easy to pick on human resources. An employee file, when I was in my last organization, the employee file was kept for 6 years after the person left the company, whether that was because they resigned or quit or whether they were fired. It didn't matter. The trigger was they were no longer there. So as long as they were with the company, retention did not start. They were an active employee. But once that event happened, then that file was kept for another 6 years. The other trigger is time-based, and time-based starts immediately. It could be that this record is kept for 3 years after creation date, or 6 years, or 10 years, whatever that time base may be. But time starts immediately, therefore, retention and the clock for retention is clicking immediately. And again, you'll determine the full retention life, and you'll also have the legal citation. Now, from that, we'll take a sidestep. And when it comes to retention, I want to talk to you about something called value. Now, for those of you that have seen some of my presentations in the past, you'll know that when I put pictures in there, there's a good reason why the pictures I select are there. But you may look at the slide and go, Ray, what the heck does a parachute have to do with retention and value? Why, thank you for asking that question. Thank you very much. Those of you who also know me know that I wanted to be a professional racquetball player at one time. I'm a certified racquetball instructor. I help out at racquetball camps as an instructor. And an individual that certified me, her name was, as an instructor, her name is Fran Davis, no relation to me. She was from Brooklyn. I was from Southern New Jersey. She always would start her racquetball camps on a Friday night because it was Friday night, all day Saturday, all day Sunday. And she would start it with the same phrase. Your mind is like a parachute. It only works when it's open. And just that phrase just gives you that visual to say to yourself, you know what? I know what I currently believe, and I believe it's true. But maybe there's some new things coming down the line that I have to consider. And if I close my mind off, like I keep the parachute closed, I'll never learn those new things. I'll never be able to evaluate it and see, you know what? Maybe this is right. I can tell you from 40 years in racquetball, whether it comes from how I string the racket, the grip, the step, so many things have changed. And in records management, that's true as well. How we've done records management over 30 years ago, the concepts are still there, but there's a lot of things that are different. And as we move forward into the future, they're going to change over and over and over again. So when new things come down the pike, give them a listen. See if you can give them credence. See if you can buy into what they're saying. So I want to talk to you about value. A few years ago, maybe a little bit longer than that, there was talk about considering the reasons why we would want to keep records past their legal retention life. When you look at the legal retention, the citations that govern those records, for the most part, legal retention is just the minimum amount of time you need to keep them. Now, there are some medical records and maybe some other records that are in other areas where you have to destroy them as soon as possible. And I'm not referring to privacy. With privacy, if you're told to eliminate the records, you have to eliminate the records. But there are some medical records where you have to destroy them as soon as the legal retention is done. Where with the rest of your records, it's just the minimum amount of time. If you keep them after that, you're not violating the law. So, there's other reasons you may want to keep records longer than that legal retention life. Could be for historical value. I'm in Southern New Jersey, right across the bridge from Philadelphia. 1776, George and the Boys, Independence Hall. It's one of those things where we have businesses here in Philadelphia that go back a long time, and maybe not to 1776, but 100 or more years easily. And from that time, there could be a reason why they would want to keep those records from a historical value perspective. Transactional value is also important. When I worked at the bank, we kept track of all the transactions that were done in what we didn't call them branches, we called them stores, because we were a retailer of financial products and services. And that story is another story for another time. But we would keep transactional information that started out daily, that rolled up into monthly and quarterly and annually. And we would review them year after year. And we would want to know, are the stores growing in the number of transactions they're doing? Are we getting more customers? Are there more people coming inside the store? Are there more people doing online transactions? Who's using the ATMs? Who's doing all the various things online? And we would compare that. So depending on how long the legal retention life was for transactional value, we may want to keep it longer. Same thing with geography. We had stores from Maine to Florida, and we would want to see what of our programs could be working, in the Northeast that aren't working in the South, or could be working in the Carolinas or wherever it may be. So again, you're going to have to decide: do you want to just follow legal retention and that's it, or do you want to consider keeping your records a little bit longer because there's another value for doing that? Now, I know the question that's going to come up immediately is, well, Ray, if you do that, aren't those records discoverable if you still have them after the legal retention life? And the answer to that is yes. But my follow-up question to you would be, are you doing anything wrong? Are you breaking the law? And if you're not, then don't worry about keeping records that are past the retention life, because you're not breaking law. You won't get in trouble. Granted, you're taking up more storage, whether it be for physical paper records or for electronic, but that's a small price to pay if they're of value to you down the road somewhere as you're making decisions for your business. And then enforcing your retention schedule. Once you have your retention schedule, it's approved, publish it, get it out there, get it in the hands of the end users. Also make it easily findable, if that's a word. I kind of made it too, findable. If you're going to publish it on an internal company website, make sure that people can get to it. Consider establishing employee training, and then make sure that after the employee is trained, because an educated employee is an employee that's doing things right, make sure you communicate with your audit department that they are reviewing and making sure that the end users are using the new retention schedule, and that you, when you get your audit, are also applying that retention schedule as well. So make sure you enforce that retention schedule. Okay, a byproduct of and a major tool, this tool is invaluable to me when it comes to records management, is the records index. And it is a combination of the records inventory and the retention schedule, and a lot more. It's a detailed list, yes, of the records, but it's a record saved by your entire organization. It can be kept in a spreadsheet format or a database format, and it's searchable and filterable. What's going to happen is this: a records index will track every record type kept by an end user in whatever location and whatever physical location they're in, whether it be like I had stores from Maine to Florida. So I could have something for every state on the East Coast, as well as, are they keeping it in shared drives? Are they keeping it in both physical record as well as electronic record, and there'll be line items for that. So as an example, the records index, if I just take an employee file and I've got a human resources function in 12 states on the East Coast, then while the retention schedule will only have the employee file listed on one line item for the employee file, in the index, there'll be a line item for every state. There'll be a line item if there's multiple locations in that state. And there'll be additional line items for every place that, if this place is keeping it on a shared drive over here, and this place is keeping it in a shared drive over there, you're going to have individual line items for all of that. Your records index could be massive, which is why you need it in a spreadsheet or a database format, because from that, you can perform data analytics. And those analytics can help you make decisions in maybe consolidating where some of those records are being stored. So you're not storing them everywhere you currently are. You're making recommendations to reduce the locations they're being stored in. But you're confirming all of the records that your organization is saving, who is saving them, where they're saving them, and you're also including who's the owner. Because as an example, let's just say you want to look at a particular record and you go to the index and there is a link in that index for each of the electronic record types that somebody's saving. And it may take you to a shared drive or a line of business system or a records management software. And if you click on that link, it may come back and say, you don't have permission to access this location. But within the index is also the owner of the record. And you would go to the owner of the record to say, I need these records. Here's why. Can you give me access? Because when I click on the link in this index, I can't get in. So the records index is just a massively helpful tool to confirm to your organization that you are storing everything and where it's being saved. And it cuts down tremendously the amount of time once you create it, finding your records, which I think might be a portion of what we talk about in class 3. All right, benefits of the records index. We've already started to, I started to talk about some of this. Accessibility of your records. You got to be able to find your records when you need them. It's for the whole entire organization. Yeah, for small organizations, that's fine. I've been in organizations that have been as low as 30 or 40 people up until like 20,000 people. So been in organizations of all different types. With an index, you're making sure that there's preservation of all the records that you should. Because you're tying it to your retention schedule, which is taking into account the legislation and regulations that are out there, you're in compliance. You have the ability to perform the analytics to make recommendations on making your program better on where the records are stored. And you're being much more efficient having that records index because you can find your records faster. All right, let's talk about the value of technology. As I said, over 30 years in records management, and I am not entrenched in physical records at all. I fully support electronic records and the methods that we use to manage our records electronically, and think we should. We'll talk about the value of technology in 5 different areas: the efficiency and productivity, cost effectiveness, security and compliance, accessibility and collaboration, and we'll finish up by talking about the future. Efficiency and productivity. Just imagining the headache of trying to manage physical paper records, what you can do with software and hardware to manage through a computer the records that you've got throughout your whole entire organization. You just can't be thankful enough. And I'll talk about this in a second, but a number of years ago, I was on a panel speaking for real estate, records management group in real estate in Atlantic City, New Jersey. And there was a lawyer from a Philadelphia law firm that was also a part of that panel. And at lunchtime that day, he talked to me and he said, at lunchtime, he goes, hey, yeah, along with being a lawyer, I also do a discovery class over at Rutgers University in Camden, New Jersey. And on the first class of every semester, he brings the class in, picks 2 students. He brings one student up and sits them in front of a desk or at a desk in the front of the room with a box in it with paper in it. And he takes another student and sits them at a desk at the front of the room that has a laptop in it. and they're both handed a piece of paper and it says, congratulations, you're now the records manager for this company. We are now being engaged in litigation. We need you to find the records. They are in the system to which you are sitting in front of now. Find them. And he would have a list of 10 or 12 records they have to find. And then he would look at the class and he would say, who do you think will find them first? And without any doubt, it was the person that had the laptop, the person that had the computer, because they had the ability to search and find. And they had that ability to use that thing you see in red on the screen, metadata, which allows you to find your records better. And so while the person with the laptop could use software and hardware to find the records they needed, the other person had to go sheet by sheet of paper to find those records. And you're right, the person with the laptop found them first. Technology gives you the ability to apply automation, and in particular workflows. They're invaluable. If you have repeatable processes that can be guided by a workflow, by all means create them. I mean, think about this. We talked about somebody needing access to a shared drive or a piece of software. So to get that, they know they don't have it, so they fill out an electronic form that then electronically routes to the records management department, who said so-and-so needs access to this program. Please, or shared drive, please grant it. So they look at the person, decide whether they need it, and they either say yes, they can have it, or no, they can't. And if they say no, it's rejected. If they say yes, the workflow moves down the line to the next person, the person who owns that shared drive or who owns that software, or at least oversees it. And now it's their decision. Okay, records management said yes, they can have it. Now it's your decision. Can they have it? If they say yes, then that continues on electronically down the line to IT, who then does what they need to do to grant them access. But it got it out of having human intervention and allowed technology and a workflow to make it totally electronic and move seamless behind the scenes, and it's much more efficient. Metadata, that's data about the data or information about the record, however you want to word it. If you don't have metadata, then you are that person sitting in front of that box in that classroom going page by page, physically looking at each and every record for what you're looking for. If you have the metadata, and there's all different types of metadata, which we'll talk about in an upcoming class, then you can find it with the search parameters that you set up. And as we talked about, technology allows you to reassign those human resources, not because they're not needed anymore, to put more things within your program to make sure they get them done, because technology can do this much more efficiently and quicker. I told you in class 1 that records management is not a revenue generator for your organization, and it's not, but it can help from a cost standpoint. There's cost avoidance, where you don't have to buy something because you don't need it anymore. There's cost containment, where, you know, if you can talk to the vendors you're using, maybe you can get them to keep the prices the same rather than increase them. And there's cost reduction, that for whatever reason, maybe it's because of volume or some other reason, or like even with electronic storage, every year electronic storage seems to get cheaper and cheaper. There's cost reductions. And I will also finish this point by saying, when I had 20 years of running strategic sourcing for the bank as well, you won't get everything you want, but you can get what you negotiate. And through that negotiations, you can bring a cost effectiveness to your program. So whether you're looking at storage costs or retrieval costs, maintenance, improved return on investments through that cost effectiveness, and also with technology, you're building to your needs. You know, if you don't need new storage or more storage, you don't need to buy it. If the systems you're using now or the software you're using now is still effective, is still current, is still up to date, then you're fine. So that's another value of cost effectiveness, just all because of technology. Without hesitation, security and compliance over electronic records is light years ahead of what anyone can have with physical paper records. Can physical paper records, or physical records, which includes paper, but a lot of other physical formats, can that be protected? Yeah, it can, but not as easy as electronic records. So whether it be through access controls, who has access to, number one, get into the system, and then number two, what access are they being granted for what records they can see within the system? Because those are two different types of access controls. You know, the protections to make sure that personally identifiable information or business identifiable information or personal health information or other types of of information are being protected. So only those people that say it. One other thing I could have put in here was, especially with the U.S. federal government, you've got records that are classified, secret, top secret, etc. There's security, the ability with technology to provide security so that only people with the appropriate clearances see the records that correspond to those clearances. Because you're using technology and you're incorporating everything together, and you are complying with all the legislation and the regulations, you have improved compliance because technology is enforcing those rules, which is then reducing your risk mitigation. It's never going to be 100%, but you are reducing it and need to keep it as small as humanly possible. We also have the value of technology, which we talked about a little bit, accessibility, but as well as collaboration. What we found out in 2020 when COVID hit, oh, we can't work remotely. We all have to be in the office. And I can tell you that there's a good reason to be in the office. But we also found out that, with the appropriate technology and the safeguards and allowing IT to perform to the absolute fantastic level that they do, they can provide technology to make sure that we do have safe and secure remote access. And along with that, tools where we can work collaboratively together. We can all be in documents working together, where we all have the ability to access documents and can we see what's going on. We can perform data analytics, which then gives us the ability to have improved decision making. And that's all to the value of technology. And when it comes to the future, it's whatever you want to make it. We can have a scalability of technology that keeps the system as small as we want it or as large as we want it. As you can see, as each year or two goes on, there's more and more innovation. What a couple years ago it wasn't totally brand new, but it was definitely the hot topic was artificial intelligence. It's still a big topic, but people are getting used to that artificial intelligence now, understanding they have to be careful how they use it. But now I'm waiting for the next innovation to come out beyond artificial intelligence. Competitive advantage. If you're always looking towards the future, adopting things when it's necessary for you to adopt them, you're maintaining a competitive advantage to keep your program as successful and secure as possible. And I'd also say, what would you like to see in the future? I used to do my own internet radio talk show called Inside the Records Room. And one of the things we would do periodically is we would ask the listeners to the show to write a quick paragraph or so, like they were attending their retirement. This would be the future. You're attending your future retirement. And in your acceptance speech of a thank you for the party that they're throwing you, why don't you tell us what you were innovative about during the time you were in records management? Now, obviously, when somebody's doing that, some of the things they're talking about doesn't exist. But what was just an idea today or a remote concept a couple years from now could actually be something that's viable and implemented within our plans. So don't be afraid to think about the future. Don't be afraid to think about what doesn't exist and dream about it and think about would it be possible. Start to move forward. And who knows, down the road, you may be able to do that. I like to quote some of the people that are very influential in my career. And one of the best bosses I ever had was a gentleman named Bob Heyman. And one of the first things Bob told me when he came in as my boss is he said, Ray, records management friend is audit and compliance. They are not the enemy. And too many people, when they hear audit and compliance, they start to get nervous. They're afraid they're going to have a bad audit, whatever it may be. His viewpoint was the opposite, and I take the same viewpoint. When you first get there, whether you're just coming into an organization for the first time or whether it's brand new, ask for an audit as soon as possible. And the reason being is you want a baseline established for how the program was before you got there. You're not trying to point fingers. You're not trying to point out the bad things. You're looking for the same realistic view of what your program looks like right now. And now you're stepping in and you'll get that audit. And now you have something to work with, which hopefully starts to point in directions where improvements need to be made. Along with that, review some of the previous audits that your organization has had to go through and see how they were rated, because that's going to give you hopefully an idea of where your audit may go. And finally, when it comes to audit and compliance, educate audit on records management. I was in banking. We had internal auditors that were employed by the bank. We had external auditors, which were part of the federal government or federal regulators. And I would always do my best before the audit started to have a meeting or more than one meeting if need be, but bring in the auditors that were going to come in, more the internal auditors than the external auditors, because usually the internal auditors were never the same, and they were working with the notes made by last year's auditors. But I would educate them on records management, what the department is about, what we do, how we do it, and why we do it. So they were making and creating an audit and judging me from a clear understanding of what we were trying to do. With audit and compliance, you're looking for risk mitigation, where you're trying to protect the organization. You're having improved governance with accountability and transparency, which gives you improved decision-making. And most importantly, you want to build your reputation. You want to build that level of trust so that people know that you're running a program. Okay, finally for today, keeping your tools current. It takes resources to keep the tools in your tool belt current. Some of those are going to be financial, and some of those are going to be human. I guess I should have highlighted them as well, because a couple of classes from now, we'll be talking about those, both of those resources and how they apply. But look at all the tools in your tool belt and gain an idea how often they should be reviewed and updated. There is not one tool in your tool belt that you can create or use and say it never has to be looked at again. It never has to be reviewed. It never has to be updated. They all have to. But the question is, what is the frequency? So maybe your retention schedule, you review it every 2 or 3 years. Or maybe you have a rotation where over a 3-year period of time, the first year you review 1/3 of the schedule, the second year you review the second third, and the third year review the final third. That way you're not expending all your resources to do one retention schedule all at one time. But the same thing is true for the index and your policies and procedures and your inventory and a lot of your other tools. So I would just ask you to look at all the tools that are in your tool belt. Who will do the review and update, and how often should they be reviewed and updated? And yes, do any tools affect the budget is in red, because the answer is yes. And we will talk about that in a future class. All right, congratulations. We're coming to the top of the hour. You have completed class 2. I thank you very much for hanging in there with me. Let's recap what we've learned. We've talked about regulation and legislation, what the differences are. Same thing with policies and procedures. What's a records inventory or a records retention schedule or records index? The value of technology and audit and compliance, and keeping your tools current. Those tools are going to make you a success, because your program is going to run at peak efficiency with the appropriate tools. Class 3, it's not just about storing the record. The question is, can you get it back? And that's the big key. A lot of people go, I've stored the record. Yeah, we've got it. And then you say, well, I need it back. Can you get it? And they look at you with this blank look on their face. You have to get it back. So we're going to talk about the record repository types. We're going to go more in depth about the records index. It is really an important tool. Like, as I said today, I want to show you different screenshots of a records index. It'll be a test index. It won't be real, but you'll get the flavor for what the index is about, so you can see the value that it brings to the table. We're going to talk about following your retention schedule for disposition, which means you're following the life cycle. We're going to talk about the litigation hold process, discovery and e-discovery, because 30 years ago, before the electronic portion, it was just discovery. Now it's e-discovery. And we're going to talk about a thing called spoliation. All right. We have our Extreme Championship performance tip, and this one is also attributed to my previous boss, Bob Heyman, who said, manage up and manage down. You have to keep your boss as up to date and knowledgeable as possible about what you're doing. Now, they don't need to have all the line item detail. They just need to know what is going on. If a senior person at their level ever approaches them and tells them something about your program and your boss doesn't know about it, that's a fail. So manage up. Always make sure your boss knows, good or bad, what's going on with your program, so that they are prepared if they're approached with any reactions or comments. And the same thing holds true for your staff. They don't need to know all the details of what's coming down the road, but they need to know, what are we going to do this year? Where are we going to focus our initiatives? Are we going to review the retention schedule? Are we going to look at new software? Are we going to go with a new vendor? Whatever it may be. So make sure that you manage up and manage down, so the areas above you and below you have a clear idea of the current state of the program and where it's at. All right, I know we have one question, but we're at the top of the hour, so we've got to call it quits for today. I'll answer that question at the beginning of the next class, and you can join us for that next class, October 21st at 2 p.m. Class 3, it's not just about storing your records. The question is, can you get them back? I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in today. You can reach out to myself or Rich. Our email addresses are on the screen right now. Feel free to send any comments, any questions, any suggestions to us. We love to read the email. We'll love to get back to you. And again, thank you very much for your participation. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. And we look forward to seeing you virtually anyway on October 21st. So take care. Have a great week, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.